Welcome to tonight's public lecture, Benedict XVI, Resignation, Historical Reflections, Future Considerations. I will say a few words of introduction for Dr. Christopher Bellitto, our speaker, in a moment. Just want to say initially this is a public lecture that's held in conjunction with the 18th Biennial Conference of the American Cusanus Society and the International Seminar on Pre-Reformation Theology. So this year the conference is on mystical theology and Renaissance Platonism in the time of Cusanus. It's in honor of Donald Duclos. So still time to register. But tonight we're here for a public lecture on the papacy. I want to thank, on behalf of the Cusanus Society, United Lutheran Seminary for hosting us here. They are my employer, so, you know, the self-interested thanks, but thanks to them anyway. Thanks especially to Donald Redmond, who's back there running the show technology-wise and bringing people in via Zoom. And he has asked me to ask people who are on Zoom to please remember to mute your microphones unless you are speaking, which will be the case when the Q&A comes. Dr. Bellitto will speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A. But first, I would like to introduce the Reverend Dr. Guy Erwin. Reverend Dr. Guy Erwin was appointed president of United Lutheran Seminary and Ministerium of Pennsylvania of Reformation Studies in August of 2020. He was the fourth bishop of the Southwest California Synod of the ELCA from 2013 to 2020. Dr. Erwin was the ELCA's first gay partner bishop and the first openly gay male to serve in that office in any of the churches of the Lutheran World Federation. As an enrolled member of the Osage Nation, he also was the first native bishop of the ELCA. A very long and distinguished bio. He has asked me to skip over some of it. From 2000 until his election as Synod Bishop, Dr. Erwin held the Gerhard and Olga J. Belgum Chair in Lutheran Confessional Theology. He can correct my pronunciation if he sees so fit. At California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks. He has a PhD from Yale. His doctoral dissertation was on the late medieval roots of Luther's theology of the cross, and his subsequent scholarly work has focused on the religious culture of Lutheranism, particularly its worship and piety, with special interest in visual arts and architecture. And I will encourage you, if you want to read more, to go to the website, or if you want, you can order his dissertation from the library. I can attest it is that thick and very interesting. So Dr. Erwin, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Evener, and welcome all of you. It's a great delight for me, not only to be able to welcome you to our beautiful and historic campus. Those of you who have been involved with this conference for a long time have doubtless been here before, but believe me when I say that it's important to us that you make yourselves at home here, and if you need any help with anything, ask someone. It may be hard to find someone because, in fact, during the pandemic, the population of our campuses, both this one and our campus in Philadelphia, is relatively low. But I'm here, at least with you, till the end of the conference and through next week, so you'll see something of me. I was asked first to make a formal welcome to this conference tomorrow at your big opening, but it was so exciting to me, the chance to come and hear tonight's lecture, that I asked if I could come and give a greeting then as well. When Pope Benedict announced his resignation in February of 2013, like any self-respecting late medievalist, I thought, this cannot end well. There's so little precedent for this. What are they going to do? How can you have two popes? Will the one who's gone be poisoned quickly, or will it happen slowly? All of the questions that come up regarding the transfer of power in such a powerful institution. And of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg, the idea of spiritual authority being vested in two successors of Peter at the same time. All these questions that immediately threw me back to the conciliar era and to think about Nicholas of Cruz. I'm sure you're going to hear about that tonight. But just to say that I think this is a wonderful topic. As an amateur Vatican watcher myself, the process, what has happened since then, has been just absorbing. And of course, it continues. We will not know how this story ends until it does. And actually, I believe with the death of both popes who are currently still living. We'll see. In this information age, when so much opinion can be expressed to so many people in such strong ways, the impact of having two possible poles of authority is even greater than it was in the late Middle Ages, at least on the theoretical level, even though perhaps the temporal power of the papacy is less than it used to be. But anyway, these and other questions, I'm sure, will be addressed in the fine presentation to come, for which I am very grateful to Professor Bellitto for being here to offer this for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, President Erwin. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. It's my honor to introduce Christopher Bellitto, Professor of History at Kean University in Union, New Jersey, a frequent public speaker and media commentator on church history and contemporary Catholicism. He has been quoted in the New York Times, the Washington Post, et alia, and has appeared in the History Channel, CNN, MSNBC, CBS's NewsHour, NPR, and other local radio and TV stations. He's a member of the Speakers Bureau of the New Jersey Council for the Humanities and former chair of Kean's History Department. In 2010 to 2012, he was awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities Enduring Questions Grant to develop a course titled, "Is There Such a Thing as a Just War?" I don't know if we'll talk about that tonight, but we should ask him about it. He is the author of 10 books, most recently, Ageless Wisdom, Lifetime Lessons from the Bible, and 101 Questions and Answers on Popes and the Papacy. Join me in welcoming Dr. Bellitto.
I'm told that I can take the mask off as long as I don't invade your space. So thank you to everyone for having me, for introducing me, to Jerry Christensen, a man who wears his last name well and who has been my friend since we met here in 1994 when I was a grad student and had just finished comps. So that was a nice way to start things. What I'd like to do this evening is, sound good? What I'd like to do this evening is walk through a bit of history, raise lots of questions, and suggest possible answers. Suggest possible answers because, hi Don, here's our honoree, Don Duclos. Because the issue is likely to be with us. I will go to the end first. Will Pope Francis resign? I think the answer is yes. When? Not before Benedict dies. And therein lies some of these issues. So when we talk about Benedict, when Benedict passes on to his heavenly reward, my intention is not to talk about his career as Joseph Ratzinger, as a theologian, or as the cardinal who was in charge of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, CDF, or even as Pope. I think that the legacy of his post-papacy is more interesting. And I think that just as his papacy was a papacy of unintended consequences, his post-papacy is a papacy of post-papacy of unintended consequences. For the papacy, for instance, he gave a very ill-advised speech about Islam, using an insulting rhetorical anecdote in Regensburg. he allowed a bishop who had been excommunicated, who had been out of communion, to be brought back, named Williamson, Richard Williamson, a man who 10 seconds into a Google search was revealed to be a Holocaust denier. When he allowed the Latin Mass to be offered by any priest without permission of the local bishop, the text of that Mass still contained language discussing the perfidious Jews in their darkness. To his credit, he moved quickly to fix those mistakes, but it always seemed like he was playing catch up with himself. So too, the post-papacy has been filled with unintended consequences that I want to look at this evening. When he resigned on the morning of February 13th, 2013, or maybe it was the 11th, I did my normal morning routine, which is I took a shower. I always get up a little bit earlier than my wife and daughter. It's kind of my job to get my daughter moving along. I turn on my cell phone and there's a text from a friend saying, "The Pope just screwed up your day." And I thought he had died. I go on CNN, Pope Benedict resigns. I walk over to my wife and say, "Hey, honey, get up. You got to get Grace on the bus. The Pope just resigned." She looks up from the pillow and says, "Can he do that?" And I replied, "He just did." And that was the next 3 weeks. You heard that the last Pope to resign was Celestine V. Wrong. Celestine V may be the most famous Pope to resign because Dante puts him at the threshold of heaven and hell, to the place reserved for people who did neither good nor ill, a useless, inconsequential person. But the last Pope to resign was Gregory XV. Those of us who love the great Western schism know this is the here a Pope, there a Pope, everywhere a Pope, Pope chapter of church history from 1378 to 1417. And it is Gregory XII and his resignation that is the best model we should look at in some detail this evening for what we should have done and what we might yet do. There are other periods of history that are an absolute mess. Well, it worked in rehearsal. The book, A History of the Popes, refers to the late 1st century as a period of time of popes who were mediocrities, toadies, or much worse. Someday I must ask John, what's worse than a toady? But just to give you an example of the confusion of this period, Benedict IX would be the best/worst example of someone who resigned, bought his way back in, bribed his way. These are not good examples for what we're talking about now. This is also the period of time where Stephen will put his predecessor Formosus on trial, though Formosus was dead, the cadaver synod. This is also the period of time where the legend of Pope Joan arises, itself a very interesting topic. Nor is the period of the great anti-popes. We good now, Don? Thank you. Of all of these anti-popes, put in place, of course, by a succession of Holy Roman emperors. It is very hard to figure out in this period who was who and at what time with what title. So the period of time that is really going to help us is going to be the Great Western Schism. The first pope, by the way, to resign, about a handful of popes have resigned in history. The first pope was Pontian. Pontian was the Bishop of Rome at a time when, of course, Christianity is still illegal. He was going to be sent to Sardinia to a particular prison that was known to be so horrible that it was likely he would not return. He was concerned that word of his death would not get back and that therefore the community of Rome would not have a leader. And so he resigned so that a leader could be appointed. But it's Gregory XII, the Roman Pope in the line of the Roman line, the Avignon line, the Conciliar line, who resigns in 1415, who's probably going to be our best example here. As I said, Dante calls this il gran rifiuto, the great refusal. you see very dramatically Celestine putting the triple crown of the tiara down. Should say, by the way, that Benedict was giving signs that he may resign. Like Paul VI, he visited the tomb of Celestine V. Unlike Paul VI, he left his pallium there, a symbol of his authority. Was that a sign that we had missed? In 2010, he gave an interview in which he said a pope has the right and may have the duty to resign in 2010. So it may have been percolating in his head, and we may have simply missed it. So my wife's question, a number of years ago, I don't know how many years ago, Alberto Maloney from the John the 23rd Study Center in Bologna was here. And Alberto and I found each other on CNN at the exact same time, and like a bunch of 10-year-olds were texting each other during the interview. Should you say that? No, I'll say that. Will you say? Can a pope resign? The wording is very important. Canon 332 says, if it happens at the Roman Pontiff, I should say I'm going to be reading some of this stuff. I always tell my students, don't read, but I want to emphasize some words. If it happens that the Roman Pontiff resigns his office, it is required for validity that the resignation is made freely. This is going to be very important for us. And manifested, but not that it is accepted by anyone, which makes me say, what? To whom do you resign? When Nixon resigned, he sent the letter of resignation not to the vice president, but to the Secretary of State, who was Henry Kissinger at the time. And I've never heard an explanation of why he did that, why he wasn't resigning to Kissinger. And so we need to take a look at this statement, February 11th, excuse me, I was off by 2 days, which he read in Latin, and which most of the bishops who were in that room and cardinals had no idea what he was talking about. None, except for a woman who knew Latin, who ran outside and said to somebody in the media, the Pope just resigned. The wording is reminiscent of the wording that Celestine V gave when he resigned, which is, I can't do it anymore. I do not have the stamina or the heart to continue doing this. So we have the entire thing here. He's talking about it. He's getting up to it. I have come to the conclusion that my strengths due to advanced stage are no longer suited to an adequate exercise of the Petrine ministry. And then he talked a little bit about, I think I need strength of body and mind. I no longer have strength of body and mind. And here it is. For this reason, and well aware of the seriousness of this act, with full freedom. So he had that canon in mind. With full freedom, I declare that I renounce. There is no ambiguity in those words. The ministry of Bishop of Rome, successor of St. Peter, and then he gives the dates on which this will occur. Then he asks for prayers. So there is the Latin. And there it is. There is no other way to translate that word as a renunciation. So later on, people who like Benedict and don't like Francis, one of the very interesting things about this post-papacy is that the supporters of Benedict, some of them, are not supporters of Francis. So when historians write this 100 years from now, a question they will ask is, would it have been this bumpy if Benedict's supporters had liked Benedict's successor? I find that an interesting question that we can't answer because we are living in the historical moment. Nevertheless, there were some people who, someone found a grammatical error and said, oh no, if it's a grammatical error, it is not canonically legal, to which most people laughed. And so a year later, he gave an interview where he used absolute language. There is absolutely no doubt regarding the validity of my resignation. Speculations are simply absurd. So there is no ambiguity there. Nevertheless, everyone uses the language of two popes, which gives me, you know that ice cream headache? Gives me an ice cream headache. And I write to reporters Now, I work with a lot of reporters, so when I write, I'm not the cranky guy. They know me, and I will sometimes write to them and correct them, or they will write to me and say, is this correct? So here is an example, and this is how I met Chico Harlan. I wrote him an email, and it said, hey, Chico, Pope Benedict should be Pope Emeritus Benedict. The red is me. You've got it wrong in the headline. You've got it wrong in your first line, and there are not two living popes. There is a pope and a former pope, or an ex-pope, or a pope emeritus. But it is not correct to say that there are two popes. When he dies and Francis does the funeral, CNN, MSNBC, Fox will say, we've never seen a pope do the funeral for the prior pope. And I will have an ice cream headache. The Washington Post is a responsible organization. We could expect, for instance, the Daily Beast to put out a sentence like, holy dissent, Batman. There's more than one pope in town. No, there isn't. Or even in a more menacing way, one could say, this is flash, this is sizzle. But nothing's meant by it except clickbait. But this is dangerous. And this really came up when Pope Francis came really, really, really close to saying divorced people can receive communion. He came as close as he possibly could and winked. And there was a big reaction against that. And here you have someone writing in the New York Times what can only be perceived as a threat. Remember, there is another pope still living. No, there isn't. And that is what open dissent looks like. So, there are not two popes. So now, let's gather all these things together into several issues. Issue 1. What do we call it? He invented the title Pope Emeritus. He came up with that title. It is not unprecedented because we use the phrase Bishop Emeritus all the time. And of course, he is Bishop of Rome Emeritus. There are some people who say we should call him Bishop of Rome Emeritus, not Pope Emeritus, but I think for 99.99% of the population, there is no distinction there. Though technically, if he is Bishop of Rome Emeritus, he ceases being Pope because he is Pope by dint of being Bishop of Rome. So maybe we should use a different phrase. And I said to Alberto Maloney, what about Papa Ratzinger? And he said, because that's what we already call him. In Italy, they called John Paul II Papa Wojtyła. So it's not a distinction because they call Francis Papa Bergoglio. So that doesn't quite work. What about Father Benedict? That's what he wanted to be called. Father Benedict, or Bishop Benedict. Well, work with me here. When a man is elected Pope, he changes his name. So if he is no longer Pope, then he is no longer Benedict. And so I think we should be calling him Bishop Joseph, or Joseph, German Joseph, because it retains that first name style. And of course, he never stops being a bishop, but we should not be calling him Your Holiness. We should be calling him Your Grace. Now, I pause here because I've had Your Grace is what you say to a bishop. Now, I've had this conversation with Europeans who tell me, you Americans don't get it. What do you mean? And several Europeans have said to me, we have all sorts of people with empty titles. We don't care. Count so-and-so who's poor, right? Do you know what I mean? And so you guys are hung up on this. And I say, no, I think it does matter to the person in the pew. And so I think this is an important issue. Now, related to this is he a cardinal? Does he go back to being a cardinal? There is no clear canonical answer on that. The big thing after this papacy is that once he's passed away, we need to have conversations where rules need to be laid down. Perhaps some of these conversations are uncomfortable, awkward, disrespectful now, and in due time, there are times for conversations. There are times when you don't have certain conversations. And in deference and respect, I think we should gather all these things and then have a conversation. So, does he go back to being a cardinal? Well, these two examples don't work so well because Celestine wasn't a cardinal when he was named Pope, and so that doesn't fit. Another example is the last anti-pope, who was a layman, Felix V. Jerry, you know Felix, was not a cardinal beforehand, but when he resigned as anti-pope, which is a strange phrase in itself, the next pope received his penitence, and as a gesture of good faith, named him a cardinal. So we have Gregory XII, John the 23rd, and Benedict XIII are the three popes around the time of the Council of Constance, 1414 to 1418. Gregory XII, who I think probably had the best claim to being the real pope, resigns. He throws himself on the sword. Greatly revered for doing so, and the sources tell us that the council received this resignation and admitted as cardinals Gregory and his cardinals. What's unclear is, did the council name him a cardinal, which actually they can't do, or did he consider that he reverted to being a cardinal, and because he was doing this spectacular, humble, benevolent gesture, they said, okay, you could be a cardinal. So he went back from being a pope to a cardinal. Leaving John the 23rd. John the 23rd tried to negotiate what we in Italian call a bella figura, a nice face on things, an exit strategy. And he wrote a letter where he, talking about himself in the third person, said that he would abdicate, solemnly taking off the papal mitre and putting on the hat. And in the Latin there, it's capa. It's unclear whether that is the galero or the beretta of the cardinal, or the bishop's mitre. Remember, he remained a bishop, right? Never stopped being a bishop, right? It's unclear. In another letter, he says, I will be due the reverence, I will accept the reverence due to my hat. There the word is beretta, what we would translate as beretta, right? But when he is deposed, they give him no title. He's in house arrest, and they refer to him as persona. They use the most, person, the most bland phrase. Then Martin V is elected pope, the unifying pope, and there is a rapprochement, and in June of 1419, the now deposed John the 23rd, who was Bishop Baldassare Cosa, is raised to the dignity of the cardinals. He replaced me, not I replaced the tire, but I put, something falls off a shelf and I put it back in place. And he was a cardinal for 6 years. For 6 years. By the way, Gregory XII lived until 1 month before Martin V was elected, which raises the question, would he have been in the conclave? And boy, is that a bad idea. So one of our questions is, if a pope resigns and he is not yet 80, and is he a cardinal? Is he a cardinal? And if the answer is yes, should he be allowed to vote in the conclave that elects his successor? Bad idea, because as everybody is talking, everyone's looking over at the prior guy, and they're looking for him to go. Bad idea. So that's related to this question as well. And this is the document where you see this reference. Now, I should say as well that in this letter, this was a letter that John, by the way, when he died, John the 23rd was buried with papal regalia. You've been to Florence. You've seen his tomb. And there are references there to him, not as former pope, but as pope. There's papal regalia there. He was writing a letter, by the way, to Benedict XIII, who never stepped down, saying, come on, why don't you step down and get the man out? And Benedict XIII went to his death, believing that he was the right pope. So let's go to some modern examples. It is said that Pius XII said, if I'm arrested by the Germans, I will cease to be Pius XII and become Cardinal Pacelli once more. It is said that there was a piece of paper saying that. That piece of paper has never been found. This story was related by a Spanish cardinal who years later said, that's not true, I didn't say that. It appears in a footnote of Peter Hebblethwaite's biography of Paul VI, where Peter Hebblethwaite says in the footnote, must we believe cardinals are truthful all the time? Little snarky catty line. But here's the question. Was there a precedent? Pius VI and Pius VII were taken captive by the forces of Napoleon. They did not cease to be pope. They did not revert to being cardinals. So Pacelli's statement may in fact be wrong. Because if you are held captive and you resign, are you free? You see that? Because the very nature of being held captive removed the failed to satisfy the canonical rule that you are doing that freely. Okay? Benedict made a comment about this cardinal stuff. In my case, it would certainly not have been sensible to simply claim a return to being cardinal. I would then have been constantly as exposed to the media as a cardinal is, even more so because people would have seen in me the former pope. The second sentence makes no sense to me because he is not hidden from the media. So he is as available as a cardinal or a pope. I don't understand that last sentence. Issue number 2, clothing. Now, this is not some left-wing liberal standing in front of you. Everyone, including George Weigel, John Paul II's, biographer, certainly somebody who was on the conservative end of the spectrum, has said the single worst thing that's happening is he's wearing white. Now, there is a difference. The difference is that Benedict does not wear that short little cape. My response to a Vaticanista who said that was, my response was, who cares? That means nothing to people, right? So the issue of clothing was addressed a year later in the interview that he gave at the 1-year mark, where he makes the remarkable statement, there wasn't a black cassock available in the Vatican. One of the things that's charming about Benedict is he's such a classy, old world man. And there is an old world ritual whereby when a bishop meets the Pope, he takes his own zucchetto off in deference. It's not really done. Benedict hasn't always done it, but somehow I'm totally charmed when he does in this deference. See, this he's really in a wheelchair now almost entirely. So even he is deferring. So what's the relationship between the former and current Pope? I think that when this story is done, and I am speculating, but I think that Benedict and Francis talk a lot. And I'll tell you why. Francis talks a lot about how comfortable he is with Benedict and how he relies on, he calls him my great uncle. He says my grandfather. Now, there's something called the President's Club. And you can insert whatever Trump Biden jokes you want in here, right? But there's a really interesting book called The President's Club about the relationship from former presidents, like Ford and Carter. became great friends and agreed that when one died, the other would give the eulogy. So, unexpected friendships. Only one president knows what it's like to be president. And I'm sure those presidents talk with each other about being the guy, someday a woman, in the chair. I can't believe that they don't talk to each other, that Francis doesn't listen to Benedict. It just would be totally out of character for both of them. And so I think they have a very close relationship, but nevertheless, this is what people talk about. Is the papacy a two-headed hydra? The answer is no, there's only one pope. This fellow, when the story is written, is a troublesome fellow. He was the private secretary to Ratzinger, placed himself basically as private secretary to Francis. Francis says, yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. Doesn't want to get involved. So Georg Ganswein, who is this very handsome man who's known as Gorgeous Georg in Vatican circles, has placed himself as a go-between and made an extraordinarily empty statement that said that there is now an expanded Petrine ministry with an active and a contemplative side. Francis is the active, Benedict is the contemplative, and every theologian in the world stopped laughing 3 days later. This was interpreted as Ganswein trying to make sure that he still has some influence. So this is a very, this isn't helping. A statement like that doesn't move us any further. Benedict, I don't think, has helped this, and this is the papacy of unintended consequences. So very quickly, when Celestine V, do you remember that list of all those popes that were 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? When I was taking a course on the history of the papacy with Lou Pasco, my Jesuit mentor, may he rest in peace, at Fordham, I remember asking him, why are there so many popes with so many short reigns in this period? And he replied, the well-placed pillow takes care of a host of problems. Right? And this is that we know that popes were killed in it. Eamon Duffy reports that from 850 to 1050, 1 in 3 popes died a violent death. The average run of a pope from 850 to 1050 was 2 years and 9 months. That's a short run, right? And so Celestine, when he resigned, was basically kept in house arrest by his successor. Celestine, tried to leave to go back to his monastery in Mount Morone, he wanted to get to Greece, but was basically kept in house arrest and died in house arrest. Okay? Gregory XII, when he went back to being a cardinal, moved freely. John the 23rd was in house arrest. We live in a different world. And by the way, that's the old John the 23rd, not the big fat Italian guy we're calling, right, from the 60s, who started Vatican II. So where does he live? Now, I actually think this position is moot because with media, wherever he lives, he can get his message out if he wants or be quiet. I thought he was going back to Bavaria. That's what I thought would happen. I was wrong. But he made a promise that he didn't keep that has been troublesome, the papacy of unintended consequences. And although I am about to withdraw, this is 3 days later. I've slept about 2 hours of those 3 days. And although I am about to withdraw, I remain close to all of you in prayer, and I am sure that you will be close to me, even if I am hidden from the world. Now, okay, we'll let him have a beer with the Bavarian people when he has his birthday. You know, it's nice and cute. And when his brother died, he got to see his brother on his deathbed, which was a blessing. But he has not only given interviews, he has published articles. He did not keep that promise. He wrote a scathing letter to Walter Brandmüller. Walter Brandmüller, again, on the right side of the theological spectrum. Not using American political terms there, using theological terms. Wrote a letter criticizing Benedict for resigning. And Ratzinger wrote back a very forceful letter that said, I have the authority to resign and basically don't criticize me for doing it. And in that letter, he wrote with Pope Emeritus, I tried to create a situation in which I am absolutely not accessible to the media. then why do you make yourself accessible to the media? And he signed it Benedict XVI. He wrote an article which he published in Communio, in which he was confusing, this article in which he seemed to say that Christians had a mission to evangelize Jews. That letter was signed Benedict XVI, though the tagline said Benedict XVI is the former Pope. He wrote a recantation or a clarification, which he published in Herder Correspondence, in which he signed it Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Emeritus. This is all confusing. You got to sign it one way, and it should not have Pope there. When he wrote the 3 volumes, Jesus Christ, during his papacy, he said in the foreword, I want to be very clear that I am writing as a private theologian and not with the magisterium of the Pope. Nevertheless, the publisher on the 3 volumes put Joseph Ratzinger, Benedict XVI. Part of that is business. Okay? Part of that's business. But it's troubling. So it raises the question, is the former and current Pope being used by the supporters and or opponents? One example of this is that there are some people who said, well, Francis is pastoral and Benedict is doctrinal, which is, of course, a false dichotomy. And so the Vatican published a series of writings of Francis, and Benedict wrote a letter in which he says, this is great, and it's not true that Francis doesn't have theology, and it's not true that I wasn't pastoral. Except there's a line in that letter that says I didn't read all 7 volumes, and when the Vatican put that letter out, they obscured that sentence. So there's a lot of mistakes here through a lot of people. So was this Francis's supporters using the heft of Ratzinger to say, hey, Francis is kosher? Or does it work the other way around, that when people were objecting to communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, people are saying, whisper, whisper, Benedict's on our side. Everybody knows it. Right? Plus the Vigano affair. Vigano, for those of you who don't know, is the former papal nuncio to the United States, who is in open opposition to this Pope. A conspiracy theorist, it must be said. And also the April 2019 letter on clergy sex abuse. After there was a synod where Francis put out a document that said clergy sex abuse was our fault, we didn't check the pedophile priests, the bishop shouldn't have moved them around, now here's a system to get rid of the bishops who did it. A letter was published that after that synod that basically undercut all of Francis's positions. Now, if you read that letter, there are a lot of teachers in this room. You read an essay and you say to that student, you didn't write this. Because you know, right? Well, if you read that letter, Ratzinger didn't write it because it looks like a cut and paste job. Ratzinger is a lucid, thoughtful, careful, qualitative writer and a stylist. That letter was not written by him. I think it may have been his musings that were cobbled together, and I say this in front of some Lutherans, table talk. That's what I think that was. So is he being used? What is the state of his mental capacity or not? And I say that respectfully. The worst example of this is when Cardinal Sarah and Benedict wrote a book together. Except when the book came out, Benedict, through Ganswein, said, I didn't give permission for my name to be used. That should say Joseph Ratzinger. The publisher went into some line in the Chicago Manual of Style, I kid you not, you can look this up, saying, oh no, The material we have from him is signed Benedict XVI, so we had, now to me, that's entirely disrespectful. As a publisher, as somebody who works in publishing, if you tell me to put your name on a certain way, I'm going to put your name on a certain way, right? So this, again, positions in this book are undercutting Francis. So this is not contributing to, there is a former pope who doesn't have the authority, and there's a current pope who is. Is it Benedict's fault? I don't think entirely. I think it's people around him, but he did not remain hidden from the world. He did not remain hidden from the world. Which leads us, and now I'm not saying he is incapacitated. I am saying you may be astonished to learn that if a pope goes into a persistent vegetative state, there's no playbook. Does the Pope have a living will? I don't know. Does he have a healthcare proxy? By the way, I say as the husband of a social worker, you should all have healthcare proxies and living wills. If you want to have a DNR, that's up to you. Who decides if he's incapacitated? You know what I think? You know, I think one of the reasons he resigned was that he looked at John Paul II in the last years and said to himself, probably, I'm not going to let that happen to me. But knowing Ratzinger, the company man, I bet he said, I'm not going to let that happen to the church that he loves so much. And so this raises all of these issues are issues that we need to work through and talk about. So let's go back to Canon 332. Can it be made freely? Canonists, including Walter Brandmüller, are asking the question, if you write a letter that says, in the event I am caught by the Nazis, in the event that I am in a persistent vegetative state, I resign. Canon lawyers ask the question, he may have been of sound mind and body to do that freely when he signed it, but who decides when he's in that situation? And so a lot of canonists are saying we need clarification on this matter because there is no vice pope. Some people refer to Cardinal Parolin, Secretary of State, as like a vice pope, but there is no vice pope, which leads us to who would do it. Cardinal Brandmüller believes that there should be a group of cardinals, likely a rotating group of cardinals, who would be charged with accepting the resignation. Remember, the resignation should be accepted by no one. Accepting it, verifying it, that it was done in an act of freedom, that it was done in an act of free will, and there should be a procedure in place in the possibility of physical incapacity or mental incapacity or some other catastrophe. And some people look at the imprisonment of Pius VI, VII, and XII. So, did Pius XII have a document where he said all they'll get is Cardinal Pacelli? We don't know. Paul VI, John Paul II twice, and Benedict, and this comes up in his biography, but there's no date, wrote a document relatively early in his papacy, all saying, in the event I am incapacitated, I will cease ipso facto to be pope. And the canonists want to know, he may be of sound mind when he did it, but could that be put into place later on? So if we're going to be looking at examples, I would like to get examples from other countries. This is my country. And so I look at the 25th Amendment, which says whenever the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or other such body as Congress may by law provide, and then it goes through, you saw Air Force One. Right? This is a subtext of Air Force One where they're trying to figure out whether actor's name, Indiana Jones, Harrison Ford, who's playing the president, is in fact still president if somebody has a gun to his daughter's head. And has he stopped being president in that moment? Should he be removed from office? That's part of what's going on. So what we need is some version of that. So let me sum up. When you go to a conference, you always wait for those three magic words, therefore, in conclusion. We need norms for removal, when the Pope says I will be out of public life, and I have been told that I have been very harsh in this, and I say yes. No speaking, no publishing, no interviews, and everything must be coordinated with the Vatican Press Office and the current Pope. That seems to me the only fair thing to do to the current Pope. What should his title and rank be? Bishop. I don't think he should be a cardinal. If he is a cardinal and he's under 80, he should certainly not be allowed to be in the conclave or even the meetings beforehand. He should be called Your Grace. I would say use that first name style, right? Francis is a first name. So Bishop Joseph, Pope Emeritus, he should wear a black cassock, dress as a bishop, perhaps wear a white zucchetto as, you know, acknowledgement. But I want to say one thing, that when he dies, some people will say in a nasty way something that can be said in a respectful way. And that is, one of his greatest achievements may have been stepping down. I happen to be working right now on a book on humility as the lost virtue, what I'm calling a biography of history as a lost virtue. Benedict will be in there. Who in this world steps down from power? We think of Cincinnatus, and we think of George Washington laying down power not once but twice. Who does that in this world? And so to me, the first thing that came to my mind was, this is such a humble gesture, that the office is greater than the person. And so one of the big takeaways to me when he dies, beyond that, maybe his last lesson is that humility is still a virtue. Thank you. So how do we do this?
I don't know.
All right, stop sharing. Right? Yep, Sean and other people. Hi, Nancy. Lee Miller. How are you, Lee? We'll be hearing from you tomorrow. Looking forward to it. And there's
Hi,
Nancy.
Christopher. I was muted. Hi.
So if there's any questions, we may have questions coming via Zoom, but also from the floor.
Since I've been thinking recently about the last years of Pius XII, whether he was slipping into possibly some form of dementia, because he didn't name any new cardinals. There was no cardinal secretary of state. There was no Camerlengo, and had not been for something like 8 years. So it raises a very interesting question. How do you judge when the man who's been in charge is becoming incapable?
There is nothing in canon law right now, remarkably, no protocol, and that is clearly has to be laid down. Of course, Pius XII had a German nun who stood at the door basically and would come out and say, His Holiness has just appointed Thomas Vicky, Bishop of Harrisburg. She was known as La Popessa. So it asks the question, if he's not in charge, who is in charge?
It sounds like the wife of Woodrow Wilson, who essentially judged what he would be given to her attention and what would be done.
Right. Edith Wilson was essentially acting as president.
And it does raise the question of what would the role of the Camerlengo be in such cases? Would he be involved in making the decision and calling the conclave?
So for those of you who don't know who the Camerlengo is, it's the rough equivalent of a chief of staff. And the Camerlengo is typically a cardinal, but he has, only the Pope has the authority of the Pope. And there is no, when Francis had the abdominal surgery this summer, if that was an American president, the American president would now have said, from the time that I am knocked out to the time that I come back, the vice president will be the acting president. There is no such thing. So the Camerlengo can only do what the Camerlengo can do, which is gather people together. But Camerlengo can't call a council, end a council, appoint a bishop. There was a gentleman. You monitor this?
Thank you. That was a very interesting talk. I have a question, kind of a conundrum, actually.
This whole thing is a conundrum.
Now, picture Francis dies before Benedict,
Oh.
and we have another wave of COVID, and you can't call the cardinals
Yep.
in. What would the status be? You have a Pope Emeritus, like in the
Who has no
bullpen,
authority,
with no authority, sitting in the bullpen,
but not in the pulpit.
but not in the bullpen. Right, that's the whole point. But when you still have your point of having the title Pope still, makes that a very confusing argument.
Right.
What do you do with it?
Right. I would argue that he does not have the title Pope.
Right.
Benedict has no more authority than I do right now as being Pope, to the same degree that I have no authority as Commander-in-Chief, that Joe Biden does, that Kamala Harris, she doesn't have that authority either, or Nancy Pelosi or Mitch McConnell. It would seem they would have to call a conclave because the rule says that by 20 days after the death of a pope, a conclave must be called, and the Camerlengo is the person who pushes that button. I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. But I think what Brandmuller would be saying would be, if you had in place a cadre of 8, 10 cardinals, then you would at least have a protocol to do it. This is everybody looking at everybody else. So we clearly need this. In the modern world, we need this.
Other questions?
Chris, there was a story in the NCR, National Catholic Reporter, not very long ago that said Francis was preparing a document on papal resignations. You know anything about that?
No, I don't. Easy enough to check. There's a new Josh McElwee just became the national correspondent, and I'll send an email tonight to Christopher White and ask him that question. He just took over.
I just want to ask you to speculate a little bit about what impact you might think that the way that Benedict's predecessor theologized his long and slow and very, very public decline into incapacity, what impact that might have had on Benedict's thinking too, as a much more private person.
Yeah, I mean, right. Introvert, extrovert, two people couldn't be more different, right? Sandwiched between Francis, who is also a big personality. I think one of the reasons he resigned was watching John Paul II. I think I'm going to say something that can sound harsh. There is the line about John Paul II, he taught us how to live, he taught us how to die. And having nursed my father to his death several years ago, and a dear uncle several years ago, I know what that is. It's very interesting, by the way, that Benedict spends a lot of time talking about the throwaway culture, that we really need to honor our elders. There's a dissertation in there, by the way, if anyone is looking for a dissertation topic. With all of that said, one could ask whether John Paul II acted in an irresponsible manner. I am not making that statement. What I'm saying is, maybe that's a question we need to pursue. Someone said, he's holding on. And I remember somebody else, priest in my parish, saying, but he should be letting go. And these are listen, healthcare proxies, dying wishes, these are all very, very difficult questions to have. And that's why the legacy of John Paul II and Benedict should be to have this conversation and put it in writing. And maybe that's in the works. as well. These are difficult questions because we're going to put this up on our website and someone is going to say, Bellitto said John Paul II should have died, but that's the problem, right? With that you try to have a respectful conversation about this, but what if John Paul II had gone into a persistent vegetative state? We don't have an answer. We need an answer.
There are other questions. We are taking questions from Zoom if you want to raise your hands on that.
Oh, I didn't know they were there. Yeah, sorry.
I love the way you ended it, but there are Catholics and there are Catholics, and because Benedict continues to refer to himself as Pope Emeritus, I mean, it's a clear division. You have the Pope Francis Catholics, and you have the Pope Benedict Catholics. I mean, it's almost like a schism.
Yeah, I have to tell you that several years ago, several people that I respect highly in journalism and in academics were using the word schism. And I was saying, don't use that word. That word is too big, it's too dangerous, it's irresponsible to use that word. I'm coming close to saying that there are some people who are in open schism. And I don't think that's what Benedict intended in any way whatsoever. But it is an unintended consequence of this. And it needs to, what's funny is that is the irony and the lack of the irony of it when people said what we liked about Benedict and John Paul II was that they said that's how it is and that's how it is. So when Francis does that, they say, well, now let's talk about this. And what's funny is that some of the people who said you can never disagree with the Pope on anything, not understanding levels of magisterial teaching, are enjoying an amnesty to criticize Francis that they deny to others. So under John Paul II and Benedict. So it raises the question, is there something called faithful dissent? And this is a Pope. Francis is somebody who, when he had his first synod, said, I wish this to follow the Greek principle of parousia, which is say it all, lay it all on the table. Let no one say, he said, this can't be said. Whereas synods under John Paul II, the joke was that as bishops were talking, John Paul II was reading the ending concluding statement that he had already written. And there are some examples, perhaps, that we could probably, I'm going to leave that to some people who actually know that inside stuff. So that is why I ask, if Benedict was followed by somebody in Benedict's model, we might be having a different conversation right now. I don't think this could be laid at the feet of Benedict, except to say that he did not keep his promise.
Thank you. Are there others?
I have to just tell you that I suggested several topics for this public lecture, and the one that I thought you were going to pick was on Pope Francis and his reforms. And I told a friend of mine in my department, what are you going to do? You know, I'm going to this conference, and it's at United Lutheran Seminary. And they said, oh, you're going to talk about Francis and reform? And I said, no, they want me to talk about Benedict XVI. And the person who's Lutheran responded, gossip's good. So I think we're...
Yep. Going once, going twice. All right. Thank you very much for an excellent...
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for being here. Please drive safe.